Hello, welcome to Second Grade Bible Part 2B. It's been a long path and we still have a ways to go. And I am going to be going over some material that may in some ways seem a little repetitious. In the first part of Second Grade Bible, I was not so much focused on a timeline or a sequence of events as I was on some significance of some of those events. And as a consequence, it may indeed have seemed like I was out of order. I wasn't following the sequence, and it may have been a little confusing. And I'm going to be following the timeline a little bit more definitely in these videos. There will be more than one. And so we're going to start out and observe some aspects of David's life, especially in relationship to Saul, the king. And we're going to begin with the biggie, the biggest, most important, most best known of all the events in David's life. And of course, that was David and Goliath. So we'll just step right into that. It begins with David's going to visit his brothers who are in the service of Saul, in Saul's army. And as David is bringing some food and drink, and also is going to be inquiring as to how his brothers are doing and so forth for news back home to his father. And when he gets to the battle lines, he finds that the Philistines are along in one line and the Israelites in another. And they're in sort of a static situation at the moment. And while he is there, something happens that has been happening for a number of days. This great, huge man comes from the Philistine army out to the middle between the two armies and begins to holler at the Israelite army. Now, this man is the largest that I know of in recorded history. He was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Now, there have been men who have approached that height, and I suppose a few women. But generally, they have been what are called pituitary giants. Their pituitary gland has been producing too much growth hormone, and that results in an abnormal growth rate that is disproportionate and not under control, and their bodies are not strong, and they are subject to illness, and it's not really a healthy situation. On the other hand, this man, Goliath, appears to be quite healthy, quite strong, judging from the armor that he is wearing and carrying. He is a very, very strong man. And Goliath proposes, and he's been doing this for days, a contest between a champion from the Israelite army against himself. Now, this was not unusual. This happened between armies from time to time throughout the Middle East and other places. And so he says, send your best guy out here. And if he wins, we'll serve you. And if I win, you'll serve us. Simple enough. Now, David hears all of this going on. And he looks around, and everybody's just kind of hanging their head, and they're just, they don't want somebody to say, hey, you look willing, why don't you go out there? Even Saul, the king, who was recorded to be a head taller than everyone around him, was not interested in taking on Goliath. And David is appalled. He sees this as an insult to Yahweh, to the Lord, the God of the Israelites. And so he says, come on, is there not a cause? Somebody take it on. And nobody is willing. And he says, okay, I'll do it. And his brothers rebuke him. They're embarrassed by him. Oh, come on, go back home and take care of those sheep. And instead, David volunteers to King Saul and goes out to fight Goliath. He doesn't wear any armor. He doesn't carry a weapon except a slingshot. Now, a slingshot was used in those days by some armies. It was a fairly effective weapon. And David was good with it. So he goes out, and first of all, he rebukes Goliath, and he announces to Goliath that he was coming, David was coming, in the name of the Lord. And then he puts a stone in his sling, he swings it around, and he lets it go, and that stone goes straight to Goliath's forehead and knocks him out. And David takes a sword and cuts his head off. And suddenly, David is a champion. Suddenly, David is a hero. The women sing a song. Oh, Saul slew his thousands and David his 10,000s. And David is suddenly the big man on campus. He is somebody very important. Now, there is another incident from about this time of David's life, and it's not clear if it happened before Goliath or after Goliath. It's very odd because it doesn't seem like the two seem to mesh, and they certainly are very different kinds of activities. Saul had a problem. He seemed to have some sort of nervous condition that was exacerbated by a demon. And he was constantly just depressed, angry. He would go for days where he just could hardly function because he was in such a fit. And some of his assistants said to him, why don't you find somebody who can play the lyre, and that will soothe you. Now, the lyre was a small stringed instrument similar to the harp. And it turned out David played the lyre, and evidently played it very well. And so David was recruited to play the lyre for Saul, and it worked. It helped Saul's condition a great deal. And so it seemed like it just, calmed him down, and he felt much better. But it turned out that from time to time, even in these times of calmness and repose, he would lose his temper and be terribly angry for a few minutes. And on two of those occasions, he grabbed a spear and threw it at David and almost killed him. David dodged the spear and took off. So now we're beginning to see an aspect of Saul that's quite dangerous. Well, as it developed, because David was so respected, Saul put him in charge of 1,000 men, and he became an officer in Saul's army. And he was very successful, and he was winning battles. And again, this was creating a more popularity for him. So Saul sort of had mixed feelings about him. He liked him when he played the lyre. He was glad he took care of Goliath. He was glad that he was an efficient and good officer. But on the other hand, he was jealous of him. He didn't like the fact that the women seemed to be taken with him, and he was jealous of him, and he was at times ready to kill him. Well, Saul had a daughter by the name of Michal, Michal, and Michal had a big crush on David. She literally loved David. And oftentimes this kind of situation would lead to a father-daughter adversary situation with the father resisting the daughter. But Saul took it another way. He said, okay, I can put somebody right inside the home of David and keep track of him. And so he encouraged the marriage of Michal to David, and they were married. Well, there was another member of Saul's family that also developed a great affection for David and David for him, and that was Jonathan, Saul's oldest son. Jonathan was a fine young man. David admired him very much, and Jonathan and David formed a deep, strong friendship, to such a degree that they called it love. But it was two men who really liked one another intensely. Unfortunately, in today's culture, that's just not accepted. And many people believe that this was an inappropriate relationship between Saul and Jonathan. I'm sorry, between David and Jonathan. And so we have all this stuff that goes on because people can't accept that two men can have an intense love relationship that is normal, that is without any fringe benefits, so to speak. Well, despite the fact that David and Saul's lives had become intertwined, and David was in the service of Saul, David was married to his daughter, David was a good friend of his son, Saul developed such a hatred, such a jealousy of David that he wanted to kill him. And there's a lengthy story about how Jonathan determined for certain that Saul planned to kill David. And because of that, David had to leave the territory. He took off and he went into hiding. He went into the wilderness and spent some years there. And I have alluded to some of the things that went on during that time. So we have Saul chasing David, David hiding out in caves until the next situation that arises for Saul. Thank you for watching this video. We will continue the whole story of Saul and David in the next video. Thank you.